we can start. So a very warm welcome to everyone for this important conversation today on global solidarity, learning and action to renew higher education's democratic and civic mission. My name is Hilligje. I'm the Secretary General of the International Association of Universities, a global NGO based at UNESCO in Paris. I'm very pleased to welcome you on behalf of the Council of Europe and our partners of the Global Cooperation for the Democratic Mission of Higher Education, including the American Association of Colleges and Universities, the American Council on Education, the Anchors Institutions Task Force Campus Compact Democracy Commitment, NASPA, the Student Affairs Professionals in Higher Education, Engagement Australia, Campus Engagement Ireland, University South Africa, the Magna Carta Observatory, and the Organization of American States. It's a nice group coming together to discuss these important issues on a regular basis. And today we're very pleased to follow up on a global forum that took place in Prague just last year on the same topic, where a nice report was published that we can also share in the chat again, and where a lot of work is being organized by the different organizations that join in the global cooperation. Today, we're at a crucial moment where we see that the geopolitical conditions in which universities have to fare are not made any easier. On the contrary, we see a lot of challenges coming to universities also due to the fact that we're in a period where we're looking at more competition again, at even challenges to the higher education system, even distrust in what universities can stand for societies and in society at large. And we see too many threats to higher education in many forms and shapes, including threats to the values upon which to build strong and quality higher education, with special attacks on academic freedom and institutional autonomy. And that translates even in very, very challenging times for universities in war-torn parts of the world, where we have to stand with all the colleagues who suffer under conditions that are beyond imagination. So we have to stand with where universities actually can make a difference, moving us into the future. I may here wish to recall the very birth of the International Association of Universities 75 years ago, just after Second World War, where the delegations to UNESCO at the time and the universities from around the world came together to imagine how to build peace in the minds of people through higher education, how to foster much more attention to democracy, to solidarity, to action together, and to renew the higher education's democratic and civic mission. It's been 75 years of international cooperation, and this global cooperation is part of the overall attempt at addressing many of the challenges we face. It's very important today more than ever to bring back a joint approach to higher education as well. We have to stand together to bring the different voices of higher education in their full difference, and also with all the opportunities they have to build bridges between peoples, between nations, between countries, and to build a global voice of higher education. We have to support and stand with each other. We have to consolidate the way in which we work together in order also to amplify this commitment of universities to an overall project for the global common good. That can only happen if we work together much more strongly so. Today, this is only a conversation starter, and we hope for many more conversations moving us into the future. We will have an opportunity to discuss this already here today in this first webinar, and then continue the conversations in future webinars as well. This also forms part of a series of events that took place. So even if this is one webinar that's a conversation starter anew, this also is a conversation that forms part of a much longer endeavor that had been launched by the Council of Europe and the Netter Center at the University of Pennsylvania with the colleagues who came on board as we moved along, with this important focus that was put back on this important role of universities in fostering democracy, equity, inclusion, solidarity, and really looking at how to renew the very mission and vision of the university itself as a sector to serve society as a whole. So here, we're very pleased to have a space that allows people to later also ask questions. We hope, however, that you will all agree that we don't open the microphone so that we give all the space to the speakers that we have convened today and who have graciously accepted to address this audience. There will be a Q&A time at the end of the event, with ample time for exchange. And then also very important for everyone to note that this session will be recorded and the recording will be shared with the participants. And we would actually invite the participants to use the recording for conversation starters in their own individual settings at institutions or in organizations. So I'm not alone here, far from it in terms of interventions and presentations. I will, in a second, give the floor to Yadira Pinilla, who's the Senior Specialist Department for Human Development, Education and Employment at the Organization of American States, a long-standing partner. Welcome, Yadira. And we have 4 panelists with us. Francis Peterson, the Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of Pretoria and the Chair of Universities South Africa. We have Kirsten Roberts-Lyer, who's Professor and Chair of Human Rights Program, Central European University, and also in part, I believe, representing the Council. We have Cynthia Nazario Cardona, the Associate Vice President of Government Affairs and Institution Relations at Ana Mendes University in Puerto Rico. Welcome. And Timothy Eatman, Professor of Urban Education and Inaugural Dean of Honors, Living Learning Communities at Rutgers University in Newark, in New Jersey. So 4 esteemed speakers who will address a few questions that we prepared and then answer the questions and comments that you will have later. We then will hear from Ira Arkaby, the chair of the International Consortium for Higher Education, Civic Responsibility and Democracy, Barbara and Edward Netter, director at Netter Center for Community Partnerships at the University of Pennsylvania, one of the founding fathers also of the Global Cooperation. And last but not least, with us here are Rita Hodges, who's the Associate Director of the Netter Center for Community Partnerships at the University of Pennsylvania, and Jelena Drak, who's the Project Manager, Democratic Mission of Higher Education and Academic Freedom in Action from the Council of Europe. And special thanks go to Rita and Jelena for all the work done in preparing this webinar and making this event happen today. So before giving the floor to our esteemed 4 speakers, I would like to invite Yadira, as co-host of the event, to address the audience and open the session with me. Yadira, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It is a great honor to join everyone here today to reflect on a topic that for the OAS is both urgent and transformative, the democratic mission of higher education, but more importantly, how higher education can be a strategic actor in strengthening democratic culture, citizenship, and social inclusion. For the Organization of American States, it's been both an honor and a privilege to work with the University of Pennsylvania's Netter Center and other partners to advance the goals of the global cooperation for the democratic mission of higher education. We deeply value our role in the Cooperation Steering Committee and our collaboration with all of you on this important initiative. As the oldest regional organization in the hemisphere with 33 active members and more than 75 permanent observers, the OAS has a unique convening power to prioritize the intersection of development, democracy, and education, all of which are central to strengthening the democratic and civic mission of higher education. Today, as everyone knows, our democracies face serious challenges, as Hilligje was mentioning. Across many regions, we're seeing growing mistrust of the democratic institutions that we depend on, a widening spectrum of inequalities, increasing polarization, and rising intolerance. In Latin America, particularly, political instability, weak institutions, and violence have often strained our social fabric of our communities and our democracies. In this context, it is clear that education plays a critical role. The promotion of civic values and global citizenship through education is not only essential, but imperative to building democratic cultures and sustaining the principles that underpin our democratic societies. From the OAS perspective, strengthening democracy goes far beyond elections and institutions. One of the greatest challenges for our governments and multilateral organizations in general is how to empower citizens to encourage meaningful participation in democratic life. Education is central to this effort. Academic institutions must not only impart knowledge, they must also cultivate citizenship and prepare young people to confront the complex challenges facing our democracies today. Universities should see themselves as public goods, spaces where new generations can develop their democratic values, engage in critical reflection, and participate actively in democratic life. The OAS joined the Global Cooperation for the Democratic Mission of Higher Education in 2018. Since then, the Global Cooperation and its partners have played an important role in promoting a stronger commitment within the higher education sector to democratic values and civic engagement. Our participation in the Global Cooperation also inspired the OAS to advance its own regional initiatives. So in 2022, we launched the OAS Learning Community of Higher Education Associations and Academic Leaders in Latin America and the Caribbean. Through this platform, we promote dialogue, we share best practices related to service learning, community engagement, and the democratic mission of higher education. At the time, more than 100 academic experts, policymakers participated in this launch, and over 10 higher education associations committed to working alongside the OAS on this initiative. Across Latin America and the Caribbean, universities have long demonstrated a strong tradition of social commitment, often referred to as community extension. Over time, this tradition has evolved into diverse forms of institutional engagement within our communities and societies. These initiatives, ranging from addressing local challenges to social development, economic development, to expanding access to education and inclusion, have shown us something important. The success of civic engagement is not measured only by academic output, but by whether communities trust their universities and view them as partners in addressing shared challenges. Too often, however, and particularly in Latin America, civic engagement has been treated as a third mission, secondary to teaching and research. If we are serious about strengthening democracy, it cannot remain on the margins. It must become central to the identity and mission of higher education. Both education and democracy are core mandates of the OAS, and it is through these dialogue platforms such as Global Forum where we aim to contribute to a growing community of practice by fostering collaboration across institutions, informing regional policy discussions, and connecting diverse perspectives. Global cooperation is not about uniformity. It is about bringing together different perspectives, experiences, capacities to advance shared goals. The OAS has long recognized that education is a driver of social and economic development. This vision calls for a shift from isolated academic models toward more integrated systems where teaching, research, and community engagement reinforce one another. It also requires continued efforts to expand access to education support marginalized communities, and strengthen partnerships within civil society. As we reflect on these objectives, several key lessons have emerged for the OAS. First, higher education must play a central role in shaping ethical and democratic citizens. Second, universities must expand access and inclusion, particularly for historically excluded communities, including Indigenous people and Afro-descendant populations. Third, civic engagement must be integrated into the core mission of universities through approaches such as service learning and participatory research. And finally, universities must build genuine partnerships with communities within the communities based on trust, collaboration, and co-creation of knowledge. This work is not theoretical, it's practical and increasingly necessary both at the regional and global levels. It calls on us to rethink the purpose of higher education in our time and to ensure that universities do not stand apart from society, but stand with it, for it, and within it. As part of this effort, at the OES, we're proud to highlight our regional publication on civic engagement and democratic mission of higher education, now available both in English and Spanish, which serves as a resource to continuing to advance our work. And I must say that I have to thank Ana Jimenez for their generous contribution and for their partnership that made these publications possible. Looking ahead, the OAS is now planning for a second meeting of our learning community of higher education and associations this fall, and I hope to be able to invite many of you to this next important meeting. The meeting will focus on advancing dialogue on institutionalizing civic and democratic engagement, expanding regional participation, and strengthening the collaboration between universities, ministries of education, and the OAS political bodies. We also hope to encourage member states to reflect on how civic engagement in higher education aligns with the OAS mandates related to democracy, human rights, development, and social inclusion, while also strengthening the connections between the universities and public policy. So let's move forward together with purpose, with collaboration, and with the conviction that education is not only a pathway to opportunity, but the foundation of democracy itself. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to the discussions this morning.
Thank you very much, Yadira, for this very good presentation. You already have questions in the chat. Can you share the publications, maybe the reports and some of the outcomes? So we see that there are many things that also came out of the work that you've just cited, where participation and collaboration are central. They're central also to the global cooperation and also central to much of what is requested from universities. You may have heard that the UNESCO just issued its Transforming Education Roadmap, where the very topic of collaboration, participation, partnerships, engagement are very central. I will also share a link to that publication in the chat for you to consider. So without further ado, I think this is an excellent introduction to the presentations that will be made by our esteemed colleagues. And we have prepared two questions for you that I invite you to reflect upon, and which actually flow from the interventions that you've just heard. And the first question to you is, how can universities and their partners work together better to renew and advance the democratic mission of higher education, especially in the current context, which is not always conducive to such kind of cooperation, but that's for you to tell us. So I would like to give the floor in the following order, Francis first, then Kirsten, Cynthia, and Timothy. So let me start by giving the floor to Francis Peterson, the Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of Pretoria. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hilligje, and I hope I'm clear. Before responding directly to the question, I think one have to ask ourselves, what is universities all about? And for me, universities are places where we have free exchange of ideas. They are also places where we have social and human development. I think that was also articulated in the introductory remarks. But there are also places to generate truth and talk truth, and also generate evidence. You obviously have to translate that to make an impact on society. So if universities, therefore, and that is the way I define and how I look at universities, one has to ask the question, if you want to promote democracy in those institutions, what is it, together with our partners, what is it what we offer? And for me, there are three things that are immensely crucial. The first one is, what is the value of universities or higher education to society? We have seen a global growth in students entering higher education, but the cost of higher education to both the individual and governments are still very, very excessive. So it's very expensive to study at higher education institutions. So therefore, the value proposition to society is important. Then there is also the value, which is not the value proposition, but the values. What values do we and our partners inculcate us in our students, but also amongst our staff, to promote a sustainable, safer, and also peaceful world? And that's also values that are important. And then the third one for me is the whole aspect of trust. And that is trust in both our society. I often talk about a social contract that we have with our society, but also trust with government. And in fact, a lot of what we're talking about threats, what we're talking about democratic challenges in our institutions do come from our governments in certain regions. So that for me are three very important aspects that we need to engage with our partners. But if you look at universities are transformative agents. So when you come in as a student, you come in at a certain point. There's a development. There's a knowledge acquisition. There's hopefully the values that you take to make you responsible and ethical citizens, and you transform in that during that period before you exit with a qualification. But there is the question for me, Hilligje, is how do you transform the transformative agent? And that is that reimagining that needs to happen. Reimagining at your teaching and learning project, and how do you bring democratic values in? But it's more than that. It is, how do you ensure that in your teaching and learning project you have plurality of ideas? You promote critical inquiry, that you instill certain skills, that of truth-seeking skills, those of ethical judgment, but very importantly, because we're talking about partners, is how do you ensure that other knowledge systems have the ability to enter the university space in a way that promote the democratic values, but also add value to society in general. And that's something that one can unpack. The third aspect that I would like to make, and that is international cooperation, against the background that you just sketched in your introduction, the geopolitical scene. And we could now say, well, our international cooperation is going to be constrained, but we need to be innovative. It's an opportunity for us to rethink international cooperation. And for me, it is not just about publications. It is not just about student exchange. It is not just about getting a massive grant if partners get together. It is about that common purpose, that shared values. And we need to build under that umbrella a way of sustained cooperation and collaboration. And I think that we need to move from a sort of a transactional approach to international cooperation to a more sustained trust. There also need to be trust that comes out of that. And then two final points that I would like to make. One of the things that university leaderships aren't really generally equipped with, I want to use the term generally equipped with, and that is what I call knowledge diplomacy. So we can manage the university, we can manage probably stakeholders in the university, but more and more so, we have to be discreet in our engagement, but we also have to be bold. And that requires a navigation that is not only intellectual. It's a navigation that blurred the intellectual approach with a political approach. And how do you make sure that you balance those two so that the message landed correctly, securely, specifically, and clearly to those recipients? So that knowledge diplomacy is something that I think is also important, that one need to engage with our partners. And then finally, it is really for me, when we're talking our partners, the word that immediately comes up in my mind is how can you get a collective impact in what we want to do. So the collective voice is for us crucial. And what is important is that voice should not only be a collection of universities. That voice should be ambassadorial, that coming from other sectors that also can understand the value that higher education offer, can understand the values that they underpin, and can understand that this trust, through that, we develop also a trust among the partners. So I think that collective voice needs to come out much more clearer, but driven from a fact that there is clearly and demonstrable outputs and outcomes that speaks to impact, and therefore our partners, which not necessarily are other universities, but in the private sector, industry, commerce, potentially also in government, non-governmental organizations, and obviously with other universities, now feel that we can speak out and support the democratic values that is so necessary for higher education to progress into our future. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis, for this very beautiful opening. Very interesting points indeed about the value proposition of universities to society, but also what kind of values are promoted, and the whole idea of how to better equip leadership with the knowledge diplomacy that is needed to bring all the different ideas that you just shaped together in order for universities to become more innovative in a way, or you use the word reimaginative, or reimagining the way in which universities can help transform the transformational and agents coming through higher education. So much there to unpack, and probably some of the ideas that will find its way into the presentations to follow. One little seed I would like to plant here as well is that universities are always asked to showcase what the value proposition of universities is to society. Too little do we ask the others to also envisage to look at the cost of no education. It's probably much higher than the cost of education itself. But that is hardly ever looked at because it's much more complex to identify the sources of. But let me turn now to Kirsten Roberts-Lyer, who's the professor and chair of Human Rights Program at the Central European University, with that same question: what can universities and partners do together, indeed, to advance a democratic mission of higher education?
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. It's always such a pleasure to see you all again, especially after our wonderful meeting in Prague. And thank you so much also to Jelena and Rita for conceptualizing this and bringing us all together. So I would like to frame my answer to this question around the human right to academic freedom. If higher education is to renew its democratic mission, it has to protect the conditions under which knowledge can be produced, tested, criticized, and communicated independently. And from this perspective, academic freedom should be understood as the human right to acquire, develop, transmit, apply, and engage with diverse knowledge and ideas through research, teaching, learning, and discourse. And this framing matters because the present crisis concerns more than pressure on universities in the narrow sense. Across many contexts, as I think we'll almost all be aware, we're seeing pressure on the role of knowledge itself in a democratic society. The politicization of science, strategic disinformation, distrust in expertise, an effort to sideline or discredit inconvenient research. Francis mentioned the transformative power of universities, with which I couldn't agree more. But this is something, unfortunately, that anti-democratic actors also recognize. There is that famous saying that if they're after you, you must be doing something right. But the power of universities to be transformative in a positive way for democracy means that from a human rights perspective, we do need to watch what changes are being made to higher education and understand that higher education's democratic mission has a human rights basis. Further, the right of academic freedom is not a professional privilege of a certain group. It is a public safeguard. It helps preserve the civic space in which evidence can be generated, challenged, and shared without undue control. And when that right is weakened, the public loses access to independent scrutiny, evidence-based debate, and reliable knowledge on complex and contested topics. And further, we should understand that the attacks and threats we see against universities and higher education are attacks against the rule of law and democracy. If we look at the threats and pushbacks against human rights and rule of law institutions, from the judiciary to the media, national human rights institutions, civil society, and others, we see strikingly similar tactics and patterns. And this tells us that we also need solidarity between universities and democratic and human rights actors. Siloization here of academia and higher education is really not serving the broader purpose. Institutional autonomy is also an essential prerequisite for the right to academic freedom. It matters because it gives the academic community room to exercise that right effectively. If the academic community cannot govern teaching, research, appointments, academic priorities independently of improper pressure, the individual right becomes very fragile very quickly. And as work on university autonomy decline has shown, erosion often occurs not through a single dramatic intervention, but through cumulative constraints on staffing, funding, governance, and agenda setting, meaning we have to have skilled oversight of the legal and institutional frameworks for universities. Because once those institutional levers are redirected towards political control or ideological conformity, academic freedom may remain formally recognized, but its practical exercise is progressively narrowed. And further, this autonomy, as we see with other democratic and rule of law institutions, helps build the type of community trust that Yadira mentioned in her opening remarks. Before stopping, I just want, because I'm the Council of Europe, not representing the Council of Europe, but a voice coming from the working group on the democratic mission of higher education on the panel today, I would just briefly note that this conversation really builds on sustained Council of Europe work through that expert working group, and a series of high-level conferences, multi-stakeholder exchanges, reports, and policy briefs that have been developed as part of that process. Particularly our Academic Freedom Insights series that has been designed not only for awareness raising, but as a resource for policy development and concrete action. And maybe Yelena would be kind enough to share the link in the chat. I'll stop there, Madam Chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. Robert Lyers, this is extremely interesting, this essential link between higher education and human rights, indeed, and all the work that's been done, as you just mentioned. This link that you make, that when attacks are made on higher education, they're actually attacks on society at large. And that's where the solidarity idea comes in again, and this collaborative or collective voice that needs to be built in order to show the demonstrable outputs and importance of what higher education can stand for. So thank you very much for that. And I also like the recalling the quote, if we're there after you, you must be doing something right. That's indeed where universities can step up their action together and develop further collaborative work. So now I would like to give the floor to Cynthia Nazario Cardona from the Ana G. Mendes University, Puerto Rico. The floor is yours.
Good morning to all, and thank you to the Global Cooperation for the Democratic Mission and the Netter Center and the Organization of the American States for the invitation to share our perspective based on our experience in Puerto Rico and our work with immigrant students from over 25 countries. I want to ground my perspective in the words of our institutional founder, Ana G. Mendes, who reminded us that education is not a privilege for a few, but a right for all. Her vision was rooted in inclusion and access, principles that are not just educational ideals, but democratic priorities. Today, that priority feels especially urgent. Across the United States, and particularly in institutions serving immigrant communities, we are operating in a context marked by polarization, growing distrust in institutions, and increased pressure on academic freedom. A crucial dimension of this conversation, and a one that is often overlooked, is the reality of Puerto Rico. As an U.S. territory, Puerto Rico exists within a complex democratic framework in which residents are U.S. citizens but lack full voting representation at the federal level. This structural limitation shapes how democracy is experienced and understood. The island's recent history, from the Puerto Rican debt crisis to the devastation of Hurricane Maria, has further exposed inequities in infrastructure, governance, and federal response. Universities in Puerto Rico have had to operate not only as educational institutions, but as anchors of resiliency, civic participation, and recovery. In this context, advancing the democratic mission means addressing material realities, economic instability, migration, and climate vulnerability, while also fostering critical civic engagement. It is also recognizing that democracy is not equally experienced across geographies tied to the United States. This perspective is essential when we think about immigrant and diaspora students in the continental U.S., many of whom maintain deep ties to Puerto Rico and other regions facing similar challenges. Their lived experiences should not be peripheral. They should inform how institutions define civic learning and democratic participation. Equity must be a center of any effort to renew this mission. Threats to democracy disproportionately affect already those on the margins. Immigrant students in particular face heightened vulnerabilities in times of political uncertainty and policy change. Supporting them requires more than words. It requires concrete institutional commitments, legal resources, financial support, culturally responsive advising, and meaningful inclusion in decision-making spaces. Organizations like Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities have shown how partnership has expanded opportunity and representation, but institutions themselves must also take responsibility for building protective and empowering environments. Ultimately, renewing and advancing the democratic mission of higher education requires a shift in identity. Universities must see themselves not as neutral observers of democracy, but as participants in its practice and defense. by aligning institutional values with actions, embracing partnerships that extend beyond campus boundaries, and centering voices of the most affected by democratic shortcomings. In doing so, the higher education can move closer to fulfilling the vision of our founder, Ana G. Mendez, that she articulated, not just expanding access to education, but strengthening democracy itself through inclusion, participation, and shared responsibility. Thank you for the opportunity. You are muted. I'm sorry, you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Cynthia Nazario Cardona, for your presentation on this important topics, and also for highlighting in particular how the threats to democracy increase vulnerability and require then very constructed and also legal responses in order to offer better access, strengths, and opportunities for the many, include society at large in the democratic project that higher education also should stand for. Without further ado, I will, and it's very nice how it echoes also some of the other ideas, saying it from a different perspective, and then really bringing in the difficulty and at the same time the opportunities of Puerto Rico itself as a state, and the Ana G. Mendez University as an example of a university fostering these important points. So without further ado, Timothy Eatman, the floor is yours. You're the professor of urban education, the inaugural dean of honors for the living learning community at Rutgers University in Newark. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Hilda, and what a great delight to be in this space with these esteemed colleagues and having been able to be nourished by these great insights. I'm going to begin with a poem. Langston Hughes says, "I dream a world where man no other man will scorn, where love will bless the earth and peace its paths adorn. I dream a world where all will know sweet freedom's way, where greed no longer saps the soul, nor avarice blights our day. A world I dream where black or white, whatever race you be, will share the bounties of the earth, and every man is free, where wretchedness will hang its head, and joy, like a pearl, attends the needs of all mankind. Of such I dream my world." Like many of you, we're in a space where a lot of dreaming needs to happen, where hopelessness and nihilism abounds. But we've been here before, and we recognize that we have the tools, particularly in the academy, to rise to the occasion. So as a social scientist who has been so urged to conversion to the humanities by great colleagues, I wanted to begin with that reflection because Langston Hughes really helps us to emphasize a global emphasis on the kinds of things we need to bring to bear to protect the idea that democracy is possible. Global collaboration really is an expression of democratic respect. And it helps us to resist the temptation that so many Americans have, especially, to place a USA badge on things. Anyone who knows me knows that publicly engaged scholarship is something that's really important to me, and it really helps to frame the way I understand the nexus of democratic practice in higher education, not only policy, but also in the work of organizing our students to become what they need to be. I see it not only as a tool and a framework, really a philosophy and a mindset too, that universities and their partners can use to work together to renew and advance their democratic mission. But it really is intellectually and methodologically rigorous, theory-informed, peer-reviewed scholarly and creative knowledge making. and it's co-produced with public community partners through reciprocal relationships aimed at addressing pressing public issues and advancing democratic and civic outcomes. Publicly engaged scholarship aims to produce knowledge artifacts that are academically credible and publicly consequential, and the evidence through peer-reviewed contributions and demonstrable public impacts and values. I think it's really important for us to mature increasingly the idea of what publicly engaged scholarship is and what it can be, because it helps us to have a different posture to the kind of work that we're doing. I'm currently in Los Angeles at the American Educational Research Association meeting. Our theme for this year is Unforgetting Histories and Imagining Futures, Constructing a New Vision of Educational Research. And I think this is so important because when we think about this notion of what higher education can do with respect to this democratic practice space, we have to know that education is a site of conflict, right? The relationship between war and schooling has always been, right? And we cannot turn a blind eye to the eye that some faculty in US states, for example, are now having to upload syllabi for approval and being paid not to teach that semester so they can change it so that it does pass muster. So these are the kinds of attacks that we've been talking about, some of the other presenters around our institutions of higher education. And in order for us to address the challenge, we really, really need to have a much more mature historical consciousness to protect our democratic thriving. I think that full participation is among the important aspects of what will allow us to move in those directions to make full proof of Langston Hughes's dream and our aspirations in academia. But my time is up, so I will pause to create space for the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Here you reaffirm the huge importance of the humanities for the future as well, and the humanities that's too often challenged as well as not that essential to provide for the skills that people need basically for the labor market, forgetting about all the rest of where we stand in the world. What I also like in all the presentations so far is the importance of plurality of ideas, a concept that Francis Peterson also introduced at the beginning, but which was then reflected in the different positions that you took, in the responses that you provided, and this importance of this plurality to allow for the many of us to then also develop our critical thinking, our truth-seeking skills, and how to connect actually the different knowledge systems, something that you also all recalled as so essential to move us into the future. So it's a unique opportunity, you all said as well, for universities when they're so much rocked and challenged to reimagine how to bring back an opportunity for the different knowledge systems to be better connected. So you already started touching on many of these issues, and we only have 10 minutes left. So that means 2.5 minutes per speaker before we go into the next round with other opportunities for providing input. You already touched on some of the aspects that would be possible, but can you highlight one or two specific concrete actions that higher education institutions and networks like this one should take to respond to the current threats to democracy? What do you see? So can we take a reverse here and start with Tim Eatman?
I'm glad to do so, and I'll be very brief. I really believe that it is so important for us to realize that if we are going to have the cultural change that we need to employ cultural methodologies and practices. And so that's why, as a social scientist whose socks roll up and down when I can explain the variance on the dependent variable, I'm excited about what the humanities bring to bear, how story circles and how engaging in understanding the human connection and what that means for valuing how we sit in humanity together. And so I do want to emphasize the humanities and the arts. And also I want to emphasize community organizing. We disdain too often the practices of our colleagues in the world who doing robust things to help us really get situated around kind of community change. And I think we often think of it too much as advocacy, as academics. And so I really want to challenge us to think about the power of community organizing. And then finally, I'll just say it's been my pleasure to work with a number of important, I think, important networks like the American Association of Colleges and Universities, which, as you know, created a call for constructive engagement with over 800 signatories. I'm delighted to be a part of the American Association of State Colleges and Universities Democracy Project and one of its leadership roles, bringing theory to practice. And the Paradigm Working Group is so very special to me in that regard, in terms of bringing people together to think strategically how to move the needle on this, imagining America, artists and scholars in public life. I've been so delighted to be a part of that network. That really made me more muscular as a scholar to understand the power of cultural organizing. The International Research of Association for Research on Service Learning Community Engagement, Campus COPAC, the Civic Learning and Democratic Engagement Coalition. All of these are examples of the kinds of organizations, at least that we can bring together to make the kind of change we need. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. Then, Cynthia, can I give you the floor?
Thank you. In this moment, responding to threats to democracy requires higher education to act with urgency, with a specificity and accountability. The focus should not be on broad commitments, but on concrete actions that reshape how institutions operate and engage with society. I want to give two examples of how our institution is doing that. Recently, the institution submitted a proposal to create an institute for civil discourse and democratic leadership. This institute aims to implement student-led civil discourse training and incorporate culturally relevant pedagogies across disciplines and co-curricular spaces. It also plans to innovate and share information by producing a documentary film and establishing a hub to promote research, training, and public dialogue. Additionally, the Institute intends to establish the first student advisory board dedicated to civil discourse and democratic leadership. In addition to that, I would like to talk about an institutional initiative that is done through our Jesus de Piñero Library and Social Research Center, which is a center that runs democracy-focused research. There's four elements that I want to highlight. Democratic theory and praxis, studying the revolution of democratic systems and their applications in Puerto Rico. Political relations, analyzing the social and cultural manifestations of the relationship between Puerto Rico and United States. Social mobilization, researching how media and social movements impact democratic processes. And the Piñero Digital Initiative to digitalize and preserve historical documents that trace the island's transition towards the more representative government. From this perspective, and particularly in the context of migration and democratic change, over the past decade, in addition to what I mentioned that our initiative from the university, over the past decade, the island has experienced significant population loss, with many students and professionals relocating to the mainland of United States. This growing migration has implications not only to the workforce, but also for the democratic participation of both the island and in the Puerto Rico diaspora. In this context, universities have an opportunity to act as bridges between communities. Institutions serving Puerto Ricans students both in the island and in the mainland can create educational pathways that remain connected across geographies, support bilingual and culturally responsive civic education, and foster engagement that extends beyond a single location. Democracy is not confined to one place. It is lived across borders, shaped by mobility, identity, and connection. Their position, they position higher education as an active and adaptive force capable of strengthening democracy, not only within institutions, but across the diverse and interconnected communities they serve. These are some of the issues that are affecting a very local, I'm giving a very local perspective of Puerto Rico, but being that we are part of the United States, it affects us in a very unique way. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share our experience and our initiatives within the institution.
Thank you so much. This is very interesting indeed, and can also lead to further conversations in next opportunities to meet. So now I turn to you, Kirsten Roberts-Lyer, before giving you the floor, Francis.
Thanks so much. And I'm conscious, Hilligje, you asked for one or two. I've got five, but I promise I will be quick, and I'll be as practical as possible. First, institutions should review whether their own rules actually protect the right to academic freedom when pressure arrives. Appointments, disciplinary procedures, complaint systems, digital security, and responses to harassment. Second, they should establish clear protocols for retaliation, online intimidation, political pressure, and attempts to interfere with research agendas or public engagement. Third, they should support scholars and students who contribute to public debate, especially where that debate is polarized or politically inconvenient, to put it mildly and politely. Fourthly, associations and networks should create collective response mechanisms so that individual institutions are not left exposed when they're targeted. I don't speak for CEU, but I was here during all of the time when we were forced out of Hungary. And I know that Michael Ignatieff, the then rector, has said multiple times that the support from the academic and higher education community was essential in kind of keeping us going. And fifth, states and regional actors should strengthen human rights-based oversight and monitoring and policy frameworks, because implementation and accountability and redress really remain underdeveloped. And that regional and international organizations should collaborate to monitor violations and build consensus and develop supportive frameworks with the human rights to academic freedom at its core. And very finally, I would just say, and this is a little bit maybe personal, but to pick up on something that Tim mentioned, how we value academic work really needs rethinking in some parts of the world. Of course, we have to publish and write, but I spent half of my career working as a human rights practitioner and then shifted into academia. And the lack of institutional recognition of policy and civic engagement work, to me, is still a problem. We have lots of colleagues doing wonderful engagement policy because they believe in it, but it isn't recognized by many institutions for promotion, hiring, those kind of purposes. And that, I think, is a shift in thinking that academics need to do themselves. Thank you so much.
This is a beautiful transition to Francis, who also said we should not only focus on exchange, on publications, we have to look at the shared purpose. So maybe you would up to you.
Thank you, Yadira. Yeah, I sort of concur with all of my learned panelists. And maybe to link up with Kirsten's last comment or last input, I think what we need to focus on as universities is the impact value, because for me it is about what is the impact of universities on society. Ultimately, you're going to have good quality teaching and learning, you're going to have research and innovation, but for me it's how do you translate that into something that make a difference. And that's my personal view. I don't see three missions of university. I actually should see two. I see research, I see teaching and learning, and I see research and innovation. And then I ask the question, how do you diffuse, translate the outcomes of teaching and learning and the outcomes of research to society. And that's where engagement come in. Engagement with community, engagement with the public, engagement with the industry, private sector, and commerce. And that engagement means that you also have to have policies and frameworks that support that. So it's supporting the translation to make an impact. And that would be in your promotions criteria. It would be in your appointments criteria. It would be in a way of how you tell the story. Because sometimes universities often tell not the story, they often try to quantify examples. But storytelling, and that's where the humanities and social sciences are very, very good in, is how do we tell the story that is not necessarily quantifiable, but have got an impact. So I want to make that point. But I want to, there's probably more examples, but I know my time is running out. So I'm only gonna make one last example, and it's actually an example where I would start with a question. If there are particular challenges and threats on democracy and academic freedom, why doesn't the public stand up for universities? And for me, that is a question that we have to internalize. If governments attack universities, are we standing alone as universities, or is the public rising in to say, listen, that's a sector, that's an entity that is so wonderful that we need in a country? As you say, it's what is the cost? What the cost going to be if you haven't got higher education, for instance, or education in general? So for me, the way that we need to respond to that as an university sector globally, that's probably where we need to put a lot of effort in. And I started to try to look at the value proposition and the values and the trust. But those things need to be unpacked further so that the public can stand up and that the sector that we're engaging with could say, well, I'm the ambassador. I know the quality. I want to be. I want to stand up and talk about the value of the universities. And for me, if we can get that right, so that we don't only talk ourselves as individual universities or as collective associations, but we have got ambassadors and people that stand up outside of the sector and talk about why democracy is so important. And that for me is something that I think we should work harder on. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That is extremely interesting. And at the IAU, we have these points. How do we tell the story? Extremely interesting, but it comes back also to one of the questions that Kirsten just put to all of us, is why is it that the work that's not purely academic, not recognized as extremely valuable for not only the sector, but for society at large? And we see that much has to do also with the accreditation mechanisms, the recognition mechanisms, the reporting mechanisms to the policy sectors, and so there is quite a bit of work that's being done on reimagining assessment processes and evaluation processes, etc. But it's hard to change the cursor and to put in place new mechanisms that would allow to better recognize all that extremely important work that's being done, but that does not fit within the cages of the structures that we've developed over time. And so to have a better impact, indeed. And your question was, why does the public not stand up? Our question in previous conversations also with Ira, to whom I give the next space in floor to react to all this, is why do students often not stand up when universities are under attack? They're part and parcel within the institution, and we see more and more that the silence that the attacks on education are met with also come from an over-individualistic approach to the education and less of a joint and common project that higher education stands for. It's a bit of a reductionist view, to cut it short because we don't have time to expand on it. But it's intriguing. Why do students also not collectively stand up when universities are under attack? And why do they not speak out to the important contributions they see to themselves and to their families and the communities around when they get access to education and can benefit from it? So it's another question that could be the other side of the coin that you just flipped into the air. But yeah, this is only conversation starter. I can't give you the floor back. I go to Ira first, in his role as initiator of all these discussions way back, but also the director of the Netter Center, and the chair of the International Consortium for Higher Education, Civic Responsibility and Democracy. So Ira, a few comments from your end before we open up for questions from the floor.
Thank you very much, Hilligje, and thank you for your superb moderating. Thank you, Yadira, for her exceptional opening remarks, and thank these extraordinary panelists for their engaging, important, significant, and enormously needed interventions and statements. And there's no way possible that I could summarize the extraordinary statements that have been made and ideas that have been expressed, but I want to highlight a few. I want to highlight the issue of the current situation as it's been described. What are universities really about and should be about? What are the means for action? And then where do we go from here? So let me first begin with a theme I think that went across all of the conversations that we all accepted from the very call of the meeting itself, that democracy in universities and science and knowledge itself are under attack, severe attack. Rising authoritarianism and autocracy. And why is this happening? And one point that was made from the beginning statements of Yadira and run through the discussion was that education, and indeed higher education, are keys to democracy itself. Not the keys to putative claims on democracy, but the operation of a democracy that is genuine, participatory, and engages individuals in active formation of creating their lives with others and building societies for the good of all. Universities are crucial to that. They are essential, which is why they are a focal point of attack by authoritarians and autocrats. We are always, universities, a primary focus of attack and attempt to dismantle what we do. And what about this situation is so crucial was described as Cynthia with the word of urgent. Urgent brings to mind Martin Luther King's brilliant phrase at the start of the civil rights movement and then continued of the fierce urgency of now. That was not only a critique of gradualism, which he discussed, that gradualism would not lead to freedom, but it was also a direct statement of the need for action, the need for organized collective action to face the very fact of a two-tiered racist society. And now we are faced with a situation in which there is a fierce urgency of now in terms of dealing with the dismantling of democracy and the creation of authoritarian and autocratic societies. So there can be nothing more important, in my judgment, and the judgment of the panelists. But what that means is democracy and the standing for genuine, engaged, participatory democracy needs to be the unvarnished and primary goal of higher education. And it has not been. The issue that needs to be thought about when you ask the question that Francis asked, why aren't people standing with us? Because we have not done what we are designed to do. There are other reasons, but that is primary. And the two things, at least in my judgment, in the United States context, we're designed to do is to educate caring, creative, democratic citizens of a democratic society. And we are also designed to advance knowledge for the public good. Not knowledge for itself, but knowledge for the public good. And the purpose then of our colleagues pointing to this is a translation of that to realize what Francis Bacon said in the 15th and 16th century, the idea that knowledge is power for the relief of man's estate. It is not knowledge for its own sake. It is not knowledge for individual success. Knowledge is power for the relief of man's estate to make human life better. And unless and until that becomes the focus, with democracy as the primary focus of that, making knowledge for the relief of man's estate, we will not get the support that Francis called for. And that, it seems to me, occurred in all of your conversations. And then what are universities for? What are needed to produce this change? And Kirsten powerfully described the issue of academic freedom and institutional autonomy, but not for its own sake, but indeed for the public good. Academic freedom is required for and institutional autonomy for creative, intelligent, useful, powerful work that makes the world a better place. It is not a privileged position. It is a position in its own self. It is a position of privilege to help produce a better world, But something else profound, I think, happened in this conversation is it went beyond academic freedom to the other values of universities. That in effect, what people emphasized centrally was that universities are educational moral institutions. That academic freedom and institutional autonomy, while is a high value, there are other powerful values that define what universities are about. And universities, as one of you said, cannot be, should not be, never have been neutral institutions. The move to neutrality is the move to denature universities and to prevent them from realizing their goals of education for empathetic, engaged citizenship and the creation of knowledge for change. They are educational moral institutions, and the values that came across here were powerful. Democracy, human rights, tolerance, rule of law, equity, justice, kindness, and inclusivity. That those values and others stand in equal stature with the ideas of academic freedom and institutional autonomy. And then the question that we raise then is the means for getting there. And there were some extraordinary statements by colleagues around this issue, but I'm going to highlight one, and that is getting outside the boundaries of the university and working with our communities. The recognition that knowledge does not just exist within the academy, but exists with our communities and universities together. That half of the equation is the university side. And when there is only half an equation, you never get the right answer. You never get the right answer. You create more problems, more difficulties. Have universities been really the solution to the problem, or are they part of the problem itself? And they will, in my judgment, they will only not contribute to the problem if they work as democratic civic universities in which democracy on campus, in the community, and the wider society are paramount goals, and develop a process central to their functioning in which working with our local communities to help solve community identified universal problems such as poverty, inequality, lack of justice, issues, poor schooling, inadequate health care, unless universities work with communities on community identified universal problems, as again, poor schooling, inadequate health care, degraded environments, to help solve those problems, listening and learning together, improving our common practice, mutually transforming. Unless that occurs, we will not be able to make the contributions to democracy that are required, nor to educate our students to be citizens of a democratic society. And last, I just want to note the next question that really is central here is we need to do this by learning and sharing together. The idea that this is such a difficult problem, such a difficult issue that no university, no small group of universities can really solve this problem alone. John Dewey in 1927 wrote a book, in fact, emphasizing the issue of what is the most important issue in terms of improving society. He said it's creating democratic neighborly community. And he said, why don't we have that? And the public and its problems. 1927, what is that? Is a long time ago. That is 99 years ago. Why don't we have that? So we don't have it because it's a terribly hard problem. And the only way we'll solve it is to learn and work together. The only way we'll solve it is to have a community of not just individuals, but of institutions, associations coming together as we're doing today to share, learn, and act together. So as a issue is this global conversation needs to be the beginning of a process, a beginning of a process in which we continue to learn and work together and express a collective voice that universities are not just important and shouldn't be, in fact, attacked by government, but universities are essential and show in practice that they are essential to creating a democratic communities, democratic universities, democratic societies for the good of all, for the good of all societies, and indeed for the global good of all of us throughout the world. So thank you very much for your wonderful comments, and I look forward to hearing from our participants and their important comments and questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ira. I think you have answered some of the questions that actually already are in the chat, and by addressing this important role of universities to actually teach every stakeholder to acquire the skills to learn, share, and act together is quite a challenge in a system that to me looks more like a competitive one than a collaborative one in many instances around the world. There are quite a few questions in the chat or Q&A, whomever we may wish, but we only have 10 minutes or 9 minutes left to address them, and we have 4 speakers. It will be quite a challenge, and maybe I can highlight 2 that you can react to very quickly. Where the first one is actually flowing from your intervention, maybe, Ira, where the question is, do you think current university structures are fit for purpose when it comes to civic and democratic engagement? And what organizational changes would need to be considered as most essential to get there? That's one big topic. And so also, what's the link between personal formation and the mission of universities when it comes to fostering democracy? And then the last one, the whole idea of the knowledge project. I think this was the backbone to many of your comments made in the 2 interventions. What's the knowledge project all about? Who is it to serve, and how can it serve society at large, and how can universities respond to that? So as I said, this is a conversation starter. We will not be able to respond to it all. If I give you 1 minute, will you then never invite me back as a facilitator? But we don't have more than that. I start with you, Francis.
I just need to unmute myself. Yeah, 1 minute to answer all of that. I think maybe just 2 comments because 1 minute is not long enough. Universities, in my university, our focus has very much been directed towards impact, and therefore, if your focus before that has been on intellectual output, academic output, graduates that you produce, quality of the graduates, and your focus has been on academic impact, then you need to refine and modify your systems, your criteria of promotion, and appointments, and also how do you incentivize people to do that. So for me, that is the process that we haven't started with that yet, but that is the process we would engage. So you can't have the same system and achieve different outcomes. So you need to do the change. And then I think the reason why universities exist is actually to improve and enhance society. Now, to do that, you need to understand who is your society. Your society is not homogeneous. And therefore, it's important that that understanding also comes through effectively. And therefore, the conversations that you will have with your heterogeneous society is going to be a focused conversation. They can't be all the same. But ultimately, the outcomes need to benefit that heterogeneous society. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is a brilliant response. And I'm tempted to ask all of you if you have your notes and if we can draw some writing out of this particular webinar and submit for publication somewhere. I think that would make sense. And so, Kirsten, to you, 1 minute.
1 minute. The benefits of being Irish, we can usually speak pretty fast. On the question of democracy and Ira's absolutely wonderful intervention, I have a question, which is, what is the hesitation with universities in not being declaratorily, if that's the word, pro-democracy? I'm very lucky to work at CEU because we have an open society mission statement. What is the hesitation? Somebody wrote in the chat, we ceded the ground. Absolutely. But why? Related to that, we need to engage with legislatures more and parliamentarians. The incentives that are given to universities, the legislative structure that is put in place, the idea that higher education is there to produce workers for society. So also engaging with parliamentarians and legislatures to say, this is the value of universities. These are democratic institutions to produce a stronger democracy. And finally, protecting scholars, individual scholars. We are a community, but we are a community of individuals. And you can see that that people trying to silence higher education and academics go after individual scholars. It has a disproportionate impact. It needs serious reflection by all universities to protect their scholars and support for institutions, organizations like Scholars at Risk that provide that support to those that are targeted. 1.5 minutes, I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim, and then Cynthia, you will have the last word. Tim.
Yeah, I only want to offer up work that we've been doing at Rutgers University, Newark, that was initially founded by Nancy Cantor, who's now at Hunter College, and that I have had the privilege to lead with the Honors Living Learning Community. It's an honors college focused on social justice. And it has taken a major effort of rethinking how institutional units understand the part-whole relationships, how they relate to the community, how they receive and operate under an anchor institution framework. The special sauce of our model, and it's in new hands now under the capable leadership of Jason Cortez, who's the new dean. I served for 10 years. But the special sauce is that we not only have 17, 18-year-olds coming out of high school, but we have 35 and 55-year-olds who are coming from community colleges, who live and learn together, right? And so you can imagine what that has taken for the institution to rethink admissions, a lot of stuff. So 1 minute is not enough time. I'm just going to toss that out there. Look up the HLOC. Like to talk more about it if possible. Thank you.
Thank you. And Nancy Cantor is listening, so she will pick up and get you a conversation with you here. Cynthia, 1 minute.
Thank you. A minute is not necessarily enough, as we all know. As part of this conversation, I think Francis said it very well, that we have to transform as higher ed institutions and be more assertive when we are discussing these issues with our students and communities. I really would like to leave a call to action. I think we all have to commit to making higher education a living, breathing engine of democratic renewal for all students, for all communities, and across all borders. We cannot stay silent. It's important our government is changing, it's impacting our students, it's impacting our faculty, and we cannot stay silent.
Hey, we have to lead by example and not stay silent, and also engage with the legislators, as Kirsten said, and make ourselves known and heard. And yes, and contrary to what Pedro Tabensky here says, to prevent that universities become complicit in their own downgrading, and on the contrary, show what they are very good at. We're unfortunately already at the end of this conversation today, a very exciting one and very promising one for future conversations as well. And here I'm very pleased to give the floor back to the Netter Center, Rita Hodges and Ira Harkavy. So Ira, for the concluding remarks, please come in. And then I would like to already thank everyone also in Yadira Pinilla's name, if you agree, Yadira, and promise that we will share the recordings of this with all of you and see if we can also capture some of the thoughts and maybe start also being these advocates that we're asking to become by publishing something maybe in University World News or other newspapers where we are sometimes also too silent on these topics. So we may get back to all the speakers on this as well. Ira.
So thank you very much, Hilligje, and I want to again thank our extraordinary panelists and Yadira for your comments. I just want to indicate that, and also I want to thank very, very much Rita Hodges and Elena Drukta for their extraordinary work. We would not be here today without their efforts. They established both the framework, the development of how we can come together, and the global cooperation for the democratic mission of higher education would not exist without their leadership, foresight, and creativity. So I want to thank them from the bottom of my heart, and I know from all the colleagues here. I also want to thank all the participants for being here today, and to note that this is the beginning of an ongoing conversation. We need to work together, learn together how exciting this development is and how exciting the ideas that have been expressed are and how important they are. So given that, I think that we can view this as a step forward for higher education to stand for what it should stand for and to come together on a global basis, to learn together and make the kind of difference that is essential at this particular time. So again, with deep thanks, I want to thank everyone for coming here. I look forward to further webinars. I look forward to the continuing leadership of all of you here, and for the global cooperation for the democratic mission of higher education, how we can continue to help advance these conversations and help make a difference on campus, in the community, in the wider society, and indeed around the world. So I look forward to our next opportunity. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Have a nice day, evening, wherever you are around the world.
Thank
and
you.
talk.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.